Welcome, I'm Kasia Madera. This is Outside Source, and we start with breaking news this hour. Poland's Prime Minister is calling an urgent meeting of the National Security Council. This is following unconfirmed reports that stray Russian missiles have fallen on a Polish farm near the Ukrainian border, killing 2 people. Unconfirmed reports. I'm just stressing that right now. But all of this is happening as Russia launches over 85 missiles across Ukraine, hitting energy infrastructure and residential buildings. Well, half of Kyiv is without power. People are being told to stay in shelters, and more missiles could fall at any time.
We are dealing with a country which is hell-bent on causing and wreaking havoc, damage, destruction and death.
President Zelensky says that the situation is critical. The strikes happened hours after he urged G20 leaders to put more pressure on Russia to stop the war. We'll be speaking live to an advisor to Ukraine's energy minister in Kyiv. Also in this programme, in the next few hours, Donald Trump is expected to announce his 2024 presidential bid, despite losing support among Republicans and media allies over the midterm results. And the world's population hits 8 billion, but it'll take longer to reach the next major milestone as the world grows older. So welcome to the programme, and I'm just going to remind you of the breaking news that we started. This is news coming from Poland that the country's Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, has called an urgent meeting of Poland's National Security Council. Now, we have no reason behind why this has been called, but it is following unconfirmed reports that stray Russian missiles have fallen on a Polish farm near the Ukrainian border, and again that unconfirmed reports that 2 people were killed. Now I want to take you to the website of Radio Z, a Polish news organization, which is also stating that 2 people were killed. 2 osoby zginęły is the headline of this Radio Z, Onet, part of the Onet media organization in Poland. 2 people killed, according to unconfirmed reports, in the area of the Województwo lubelskie, which is on the east of Poland, very near to the border. This is website it's quoting Polskie Radio Lublin, which is the radio station for that area. And I'm just stressing that these are unconfirmed reports that stray Russian missiles have fallen within Poland. But given the number of launches of airstrikes from Russia onto Ukraine throughout the day, this is a very grave development if it is confirmed, because of course Poland is a member of the NATO alliance. So this would technically be Russia attacking a NATO country. So these are unconfirmed reports, and I will continue to stress that. Mateusz Morawiecki, Poland's Prime Minister, is calling an urgent meeting of Poland's National Security Council, but again, no reason has been given as to why, but it follows these unconfirmed reports. Now, just going back to what has been happening across Ukraine today, Russia has launched one of its biggest barrages of missile attacks. Millions of people are now without power and electricity across the country following those missile strikes across the country. This is what Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had to say.
I ask you kindly, please stay safe. Stay in the shelters for some time. I know that our energy is switched off because of the shelling in many cities of our country. We are working. We will restore everything. We will get over everything. Glory to Ukraine. Well done, everybody.
So Volodymyr Zelensky reacting to what has been happening across Ukraine. In Kyiv, at least half of the residents are without electricity due to emergency power outages. And a Polish war correspondent captured this footage, which gives you some idea of just the sheer scale of the attacks. Now, someone else who was also in Kyiv when the attack happened is Victoria Zuhan. She's from the BBC Ukrainian service.
When I heard the siren in the afternoon, it sounded just like another siren in Kyiv, which has become a part of a daily life. And I wouldn't say that people ran to the shelters, or traffic stopped, or parents removed children from playgrounds if they were there. But soon it became obvious that it's a massive attack.
So our colleague there from the BBC Ukrainian service, Anna Kiri, lives in Kiev, and she told the BBC earlier that she'd heard also numerous explosions.
I feel about my sons because the younger one now is at school. They are sitting with all their classmates in a basement shelter and continue lessons with their teacher. And my older son now in my flat, and this house is situated very close to area when explosion was.
Well, as you've just heard, the city of Mykolaiv has also been attacked, as have cities including Chernihiv, Zaporizhia and Kharkiv. Ukrainian government has described the energy situation across the country as critical. In Lviv, people are being advised to stay in shelters following reports of explosions. The mayor says that 80% of the city is without electricity, so there's no heating or water. Well, our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, is in the port city of Odessa. This is what he told the BBC just a little earlier.
In the last few minutes, while I've been waiting to talk to you, at least a dozen fire engines have come down this road behind me, and ambulances and police cars, because they're saying that there have been attacks by one Russian caliber cruise missile and 8 of the Shahid so-called kamikaze Iranian drones.
Well, the missile strikes have also caused disruption to electricity services in neighbouring Moldova. The country is calling on Russia to stop its attacks. Moscow has yet to respond to any of this. This is what an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defence had to say.
Russia has been humiliated on the battlefield time and again, setback after setback. Ukrainian army is beating Russians, they're fleeing, but of course they have to somehow respond, and terror is their response tactics.
Well, several theories are being put forward about the specific timing of these latest attacks. The head of President Zelensky's office has tweeted that the strike is Russia's answer to the speech by Ukraine's president to the G20 summit. We'll have more on that a little bit later, but these are also the first Russian missile strikes on Ukraine's cities since Kyiv's forces liberated the key southern port city of Kherson on Friday. Now, the city had been under occupation since March. It was annexed by Russia in late September. So let's cross over live to Kyiv to speak to Pavlo Kuchta, who's advisor to the Ukrainian energy minister. And I just want to start with, what are you hearing? I know that Andrzej Duda, Poland's president, is very close in terms of when he talks to Volodymyr Zelensky. What are you hearing about these unconfirmed reports of Russian missiles crossing into Poland?
Essentially, at this point, it's the same information that you've been giving. So unconfirmed reports of 2 missiles falling in Poland near the border, possibly with victims, so doing some damage and possibly killing some people. These are unconfirmed, and of course, this is an information which is grim and very grave, and we have to treat it carefully. And I'm waiting for official reaction from the Polish government. But I doubt they would have started calling up their National Security Committee, their top decision-making body for security issues, out of the blue, right? So something has definitely happened. We need to hear the official position of Poland now. I would remind you that de facto, if that's indeed a Russian missile strike, that's an attack on NATO.
Yes, of course, because the whole stance of NATO is an attack on one is an attack on all. And obviously, Yavoriv, you've got the training base, the army base of Yavoriv, which is around 20 kilometers from the Polish border in that area. It had come under attack previously at the start of the war. Of course, thank you for clarifying that we are waiting for confirmation. Of course, we are, from the Polish government. But as you say, the consequences of this could potentially be enormous.
Quite so, and that's why we obviously have to wait for official positions. This is very, very serious. This is an escalation of an already the largest war in Europe to a possibly new level. This is very dangerous, and I think this clearly shows to us once again, if someone was not convinced yet, that Russia needs to be stopped, right? This has to stop. This is a danger to everyone.
And when it comes to the situation on the ground in those cities that have been targeted today across Ukraine, Pavlo, just bring us up to date with where we are, because we already know that it's been a very difficult situation in terms of electricity supplies, in terms of energy. What is happening now? I know you're joining us from Kyiv, one of the many cities that have been targeted.
Yeah, I've just looked out of the window to take a look at the situation. So most of it is dark, actually. There is some light. The info I have is that about half of Kyiv, which is the largest city in Ukraine, has power down. The city of Kharkiv, the second largest in the country, is down fully with the whole region. So no power there, and probably it will not be restored until morning. In Lviv, another large city in the west of Ukraine, even the heating has had to be stopped because there was not enough electricity to do that, and the whole city is dark. So this has been big. It's been bigger. This is the largest missile strike since November 10, and it's larger. So they've been preparing. They've been waiting for several days. There were no strikes. It was relatively calm, and they definitely were preparing. The numbers I have as of now, they are still unconfirmed. The tally is still being taken, and we hear different numbers. What I heard is 112 missiles fired, 73 of them shut down. So quite effective work by Ukrainian air defenses. But of course, with such a massive volley, some of the missiles still managed to penetrate and cause significant damage.
Okay, well, Pavlo Kukhta, advisor to the Ukrainian energy minister, joining us from your home in Kyiv. Thank you very much for just bringing us up to date with the situation there, and also for giving your reaction to the breaking news that we're having that Poland has convened an emergency national security meeting after we believe that 2 people were killed near the border with Ukraine, and there are reports of an explosion at a grain storage facility at the village of Przewodów, which is just across the border from Lviv. Now, I know that Polish media are reporting this, but I'm just going to caveat that we're yet to have this confirmed. Let's cross over to speak to our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams, who joins us live now. Paul, what can we categorically say? What do we know?
Well, I think the fact that we have a meeting of Poland's senior security people, including the Prime Minister and the President, tells you that something has happened, something serious has happened. The details of this have been reported, as you say, on Polish media and by other disparate sources, including Latvia's defense minister, who has offered his condolences to our Polish brothers and called this a crime. There are also some suggestions that American intelligence officials have confirmed this to other reporters. So this is out there. It is being reported, and I think we'll have to wait to see what the outcome of that emergency meeting in Poland is before we know exactly the official details, as it were. What this looks like, frankly, is a Russian missile that has fallen almost certainly accidentally where it was not designed to fall. Obviously, we had today a very, very large onslaught of Russian missiles, around 90 in total. Not all of those fell where they were intended to fall. A large proportion of those were intercepted by Ukrainian air defense missiles. So there are any number of scenarios that could explain why a missile or a fragment of a missile fell over the border into Poland and caused what we understand to be 2 civilian deaths. This is the kind of incident that people have been extremely worried about ever since the war began on the borders of NATO. But I think we should be very careful before jumping to any conclusions about why this missile landed where it did. It's extremely unlikely, I would have thought, that Russia would deliberately target the territory of a NATO member.
What does this mean in terms of NATO's collective defence? We had the NATO summit earlier on today where Russia was named as an enemy for the first time when in its strategic plan when it comes to the NATO allies. When it comes to NATO's Article 5?
Well, that calls on NATO members to react collectively essentially the logic being that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. Now, is this an attack on a NATO member? If a missile is intercepted and falls out of its intended trajectory and lands across the border, does that meet the terms of the definition of an attack? I would hesitate to say that it does, and I think there will be a lot of people perhaps anxious to know that this was a mistake and not something deliberate, because something deliberate would obviously set in motion all kinds of discussions about how NATO can and should respond. But look, what we're looking at, and the pictures are there circulating on social media, is a large crater in a farm somewhere, and a tractor trailer that has been turned on its side, and we understand 2 people killed. That does not look like a deliberate Russian attack on a NATO member. It is not an attack on, the infrastructure being used to transport weapons from Poland into Ukraine, for example, the kind of thing that perhaps there might have been some fears that Russia would do at some point. This looks, and I underline at the moment, it looks like something accidental.
Paul Adams, thank you very much just for talking us through that. Paul Adams, our diplomatic correspondent, thank you. So, caveating very much that what we know so far, let's cross to speak to Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring, who joins us now. Vitaly, of course, this is breaking news and we're yet to have it confirmed, but we do know that the Polish government are convening this meeting. What can you tell us?
And Polish officials are very careful not to speculate about the causes of what happened. I've been looking at what Polish media are saying, and local security officials who've been to the scene, all they're confirming is that there's been an explosion and 2 people killed. And also Polish media are saying that members of the military are on site, so potentially there's reason for them to be there. Now, there are also reports from the news agency AP quoting a senior US intelligence official, unnamed, as saying that it was Russian missiles that crossed into Poland. Again, that's not confirmed. As of now, Russia has not commented on the incident, and people in Ukraine, after today's wave of missile strikes, what they're saying now on social media is that, well, look, this war between Russia and Ukraine is now expanding outside of Ukraine.
And again, we await to get any official confirmation or any official word apart from the Polish government, apart from what they're saying is that this meeting is being convened. But there is, as you were saying, Polish media showing images. Of course, Poland is a NATO member. I just wonder where, in terms of reaction to all of this, what potentially this could do. How do the international community de-escalate this?
Well, this is the moment that some people in Ukraine, for example, have been looking forward to, and others fearing, because all this time Ukraine has been calling on the West to send more weapons, better weapons, more sophisticated and expensive weapons to fight Russia. And also Ukrainian officials have been openly suggesting that an actual presence of NATO boots on the ground would help Ukraine fight Russia. And that's something Western nations have been really keen to avoid, because if NATO were to deploy troops to Ukraine, that would potentially provoke President Putin into escalating this conflict even more. But now a lot depends on what this meeting of the Polish National Security Committee decides, and how Russia reacts, and whether it is indeed Russian missiles that caused the explosions, which, as you say, is not confirmed at the moment.
And Vitaly, just if this is confirmed as having been a Russian missile, and just explain to us where these missiles, how they are, where they're being sent from, that this potentially has overshot the border area between Ukraine and Poland.
So we're talking about distances of thousands of kilometers. Ukrainian officials said today that the cruise missiles that were that targeted Ukraine today, they were launched from areas far or deep inside Russia, and it's perhaps no wonder that some of them are less accurate than the others and could have potentially strayed out of Ukraine. And I've been looking at the timing of when these explosions happened, and it appears that they took place just as when Ukraine was pummeled by these Russian cruise missiles. So I think it's fair to say that the Russian weaponry, what we've seen during this war, has not really demonstrated amazing levels of precision, and lots of civilian infrastructure, residential buildings were hit in Ukraine deliberately or not, and that's suggested that some of these missiles can be really inaccurate, and that makes a lot of people think currently that it's not impossible for these Russian missiles to stray out of Ukraine and target unintended areas in places like Poland.
Okay, well, for the time being, Vitaly, thank you very much. Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring. And I know Vitaly and the BBC Monitoring team will continue to monitor this developing situation, this breaking news story. Also, just a few minutes ago, the Pentagon's press secretary said this.
We are aware of the press reports alleging that 2 Russian missiles have struck a location inside Poland near the Ukraine border. I can tell you that we don't have any information at this time to corroborate those reports. And are looking into this further. And so when we do have an update to provide, we'll be sure to do so.
So the Pentagon's press secretary, they're saying that they're looking into these reports. And I'm just stressing that in terms of actual confirmation, we are still awaiting that. Let's cross over to Washington Live now to Dr. Alina Polyakovska, president of the Center for European Policy Analysis. You're also an expert in Russian foreign policy. Of course, this is a developing, breaking news story, but given what we've seen today with those extensive attacks across Ukraine, can you just comment on what we're hearing when it comes to potentially what has happened in Poland?
Well, of course, we don't know the facts on the ground yet, as you said, but certainly this was not unexpected. Russian missile attacks have not been precise. They've been quite imprecise, in fact, in hitting their targets for the last months of this war. And they have just recently launched the most massive missile attack on Ukraine in the last 9 months. It was really a matter of time until one of these missiles was going to cross over into Poland or another neighboring state that is part of NATO and part of the EU. I mean, certainly, if this is what has happened, it's deeply, deeply concerning and could lead to a quite profound escalation in the war.
If it is, if we get confirmation, we're of course, and I'm caveating this all the time, that this hasn't been confirmed as such, but there's an awful lot of activity across Polish media at the moment, and we're waiting to hear what the Polish government is going to say. Mateusz Morawiecki calling that urgent meeting of the National Security Council. But when it comes with NATO, we know about its Article 5, defence of one is defence of all. If this is a mistake, does that still apply?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with what the Russian side will now say and do. Of course, if we hear an official statement from the Kremlin saying that this was an accidental hit, if that is what it is, then that will change things. I think that will change how the current meeting in the National Security Council session in Poland goes. I think very much throughout this war, Putin and the Kremlin has kept maneuverability. So it's really up to them to make a statement as soon as possible to avoid any kind of potential misperceptions that this was an intentional attack. And if it was an intentional attack,
I mean, certainly that is very, very concerning. If it was an accident, we need to hear that as soon as possible from official Kremlin sources.
Is that something that you genuinely would expect, though? Because let's face it, you've got Sergei Lavrov, Russia's representative at the G20, speaking today while these attacks from Russia across Ukraine, these extensive attacks are taking place. It doesn't feel like whatever is, once we get confirmation or not, whatever is happening in Poland, does it feel like the Russians would actually be willing to be so open about it?
I do think the chances of that are slim. Very much throughout the war and even before February 24th, Russian officials have lied consistently about their intentions against Ukraine, about their intention against Ukraine's allies. So I would be surprised to see them make that clear. On the other hand, it would be the prudent move. I don't think there's a real interest for Mr. Putin or his close advisors, including Mr. Lavrov, in starting a potential direct confrontation with NATO. To be clear, a potential confrontation with NATO would be the potential beginning of a global war and a global crisis beyond what we have in Ukraine. And Russia would lose that war, hands down. The Kremlin is aware of that. They are losing a huge amount of weapons and soldiers in this conflict with Ukraine. They want to contain it. They can contain it if they take the right initiative here and make it very clear that if this is a confirmed missile attack, that it was not intentional. Because, as I said, we are looking at an incredibly dangerous situation at this particular moment if there was a missile attack and the Kremlin stays silent on it.
Well, Dr. Polyakova, just to re-stress, the Pentagon saying that it cannot confirm reports that Russian missiles have crossed into Poland near the Ukraine border. We're still awaiting any kind of official confirmation. But I just wonder, when you have Russia at the table at the G20, what kind of message does it send to the Kremlin? Is it not just a green light to behave in this manner?
You know, absolutely. I think the international community has been far too slow to send a very clear signal to the Kremlin, to Mr. Putin, that his war of aggression against Ukraine does not any longer give him any access to the broader international conversations and the debates that we're seeing today at the G20. I think President Zelensky was correct to continuously to refer to the G20 meeting as the G19. Russia has no place at the table of civilized nations based on what we're seeing unfold in Ukraine, the kind of brutality we're seeing unfold in Ukraine. It's no question in my mind that the timing of this attack to coincide with the G20 meeting, to coincide with President Zelensky's virtual address, where he urged the G20 members to send a clear signal to Russia that this missile attack was strategically designed to take place during that meeting and to follow President Zelensky's speech. And this should, like so many other things the Russian Federation has done, send a very, very clear signal. The Kremlin is not interested in de-escalating. They're not interested at this time in negotiating. They're interested in wiping Ukraine off the face of the earth. And they're interested in undermining the international alliances that Ukraine has to support its ability to defend itself. This was no accident that this missile attack on Ukraine took place during the G20. Of course, remains to be seen whether the reports of potential missiles hitting Poland was accidental or not. And again, the Kremlin should, if this was an accident, and it is confirmed to be a missile attack in the future, they should deny it. They should clearly state that that's what it was.
Dr. Polyakova, and again, I just want to remind everybody that the Pentagon is saying that they understand that the press are reporting on this. We have no information at this time to corroborate those reports, but they stress that they are taking them seriously and looking into them. So this idea, this notion that, and we know that Polish press are very much reporting that a Russian missile has fallen within the Poland borders, but we haven't got confirmation as such of that. But the Polish Prime Minister is convening this special meeting. But I just wonder, while we have the G20 ongoing at this moment in time. Have you, the relationship between, say, China and Russia or India and Russia, can you just comment on how that is potentially changing, not least because of the ongoing brutality of the war in Ukraine, but just simply given today's missile attacks, that brutal attack across so many different pockets, parts, cities of Ukraine?
You know, it's very clear to me that at the beginning of the war on February 24th, Mr. Putin and his advisors thought they were going to have a quick war, a 3-day so-called special military operation, which is, of course, the Russian propaganda language for the war against Ukraine. And now that we are looking at 9 months and many lives lost, in addition to Russia increasingly looking like it might lose this war, its alliances and its support is starting to fracture. You know, just recently we heard President Xi of China say that he had some concerns about the relationship with Russia. Mr. Putin alluded to this in a speech that he made, which was very, very unusual to hear Mr. Putin acknowledge that his counterpart, President Xi, had concerns about the relationship. You know, we're now starting to see that the so-called alliance friendship of no limits, which Russia and China signed shortly before Putin launched the war against Ukraine, that this so-called limitless friendship does have limits. There's some serious concerns both from India and China about the nuclear threats that Mr. Putin and officials in the Kremlin, as well as the Russian media, have been making against Ukraine. If there is a desire and a serious discussion happening within the Kremlin about tactical nuclear weapons use in Ukraine, that would, to my mind, I think, fracture whatever support the Kremlin currently has. And that support is already increasingly fragile because at the end of the day, you know, China has probably no interest in aligning itself with a country that is not competitive economically and that is not going to help China have the kind of global economic and political reach that it wants. Any country that now supports Russia is de facto isolating itself from the global community and from prosperity in the global economy. And I don't think any country like India or China want to be associated with Russia if this war continues in this direction. I think it'll be very smart for leaders and officials in both countries to continue to put some political pressure on Mr. Putin to bring this war to an end. It's not the Ukrainians who started this war. We should not be pressuring Ukraine to the settlement table. It's the Russian side that started this war, and it's up to Mr. Putin to end it.
Dr. Alina Polyakova, Russian foreign policy expert, joining us from the Center for European Policy Analysis. Thank you very much for taking the time to just talk us through that breaking news that we are getting coming in from the top of the hour, that Poland has convened an emergency national security meeting. And this is after 2 people have been reported to have been killed near the border with Ukraine. Now, I'm stressing that no reason has been given for the meeting to have been convened, but of course this follows reports that stray Russian missiles fell on a Polish farm near the Ukrainian border. Firefighters have confirmed an explosion at the farm and that there were indeed 2 deaths, but they do not give us the cause. So I'm caveating this very much that we haven't had it confirmed as to whether these are indeed Russian missiles. But we know that a few moments ago, the Pentagon's press secretary had this reaction.
We are aware of the press reports alleging that 2 Russian missiles have struck a location inside Poland near the Ukraine border. I can tell you that we don't have any information at this time to corroborate those reports. And are looking into this further. And so when we do have an update to provide, we'll be sure to do so.
So the Pentagon, they're just stressing that they will provide more information when they get it. Let's cross over to speak to the former US ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. I don't need to remind you, obviously, about NATO's Article 5. What does this mean if this is indeed true, that these are Russian missiles falling into NATO territory?
Right. First thing is, before you get to Article 5, there's Article 4, which is consultations among allies concerning the security situation affecting them. And I think there ought to be an emergency meeting of the North Atlantic Council to hear from Poland, to discuss what happened, and to demand an explanation from Russia. Why did Russian missiles hit this farm in Poland? I think my own judgment is that this was an accident. I don't think Russia intended to attack NATO, and I don't think NATO wants to escalate into a conflict with Russia, but we need an explanation from Russia. And NATO also needs to issue a warning that it will not tolerate attacks on NATO territory, whether or not they are accidents in the future, and that any such future attack, accidental or not, would be met with a proportionate response.
So when it comes to when you talk about a proportionate response, does this all then hinge on whether, and again, I'm caveating this all the time that we haven't had this fully confirmed, but when it comes to whether this was a mistake, that they'd overshot when it comes to the border between Poland and Ukraine, does that mean that the potential reaction or the response from NATO will be different than if it was an attack as such?
Yes, it should be. A deliberate attack on NATO territory should be met with the full force of NATO. I doubt that that's what this is, but we need to hear Russia say that. And so I think demanding an explanation from Russia is critical, and warning Russia that it won't be tolerated is also critical. So the first step is for NATO allies to consult with each other, to hear a detailed briefing from Poland, and to make clear that we are unified and we won't tolerate this thing in the future. If it is a deliberate attack on NATO and Russia says, we don't care, we're going to bomb wherever we want, I think that is a game changer for NATO, and we have to recognize that Russia's war in Ukraine just has to end.
I just wonder what would satisfy you then in terms of a response from Russia, because it feels Russia is renowned for not being transparent. Nobody knows what President Putin is thinking. What kind of reaction from them would satisfy you to know that this should be de-escalated if, and I'm stressing this continuously, if this is indeed what Polish media at least are reporting?
Yeah, I think that we have to start from the premise that Putin may want to create an image of being in a conflict with NATO, which would benefit him, and we don't want to create that image. And second, we don't really want to be in a conflict with Russia. So we shouldn't just slide into that escalation. So we should give Russia the opportunity to explain that this was an accident and to undertake not to do it again. If there's no explanation at all, I think that NATO still then needs to think about a proportionate response.
And when we hear about, from your experience, when we hear about the Polish government calling a National Security Council meeting, one doesn't call that off that there must be concerns if that is the level at which they're now looking at this.
It's exactly what any country would do. If there's an attack on your territory, the first thing that your government will do is convene a meeting of all the senior officials, all the advisors, to make sure you have full information as best you can of what happened, that you discuss options for a response. And I'm sure one of the things they'll be discussing is making a formal request at NATO for consultations.
Apologies. As you can appreciate, in the interests of full transparency and disclosure, there's an awful lot going on in my ear at the moment. But in terms of with your reaction to all of this, I just wonder how the kind of analysis that needs to be done on what potentially has happened in eastern Poland, what kind of levels of analysis need to be done from the remains of this missile, whatever caused this explosion? What would satisfy you?
Well, I think that before you even talk about the remnants of the missile, we should have good information about the trajectory of the missiles, where they were fired from, how they were fired, what the likely target was. Was it in conjunction with other missiles being fired that were coming from the same area and going to a target that's identifiable? There's a lot of things that we should know already based on radar and telemetry and trajectories. The missile itself, I think we'll be able to identify pretty quickly what it is. It's more important that we get a clear statement from Russia about their intent. Was it their intent to actually attack Poland? I would be surprised. If so, that's one set of responses from NATO. If it was not their intent, then we need to hear that, and we need to make clear that it must not happen again.
Now, I'm just, in terms of the location of this, we know that on the Ukrainian side, there is the Yavoriv base, and at the beginning of the war, that had been a base where Ukrainian military had been trained by international forces, and we know that Russia had tried to attack that base previously at the start of this war. I just wonder, is that still a potential target for Russian missiles? Because that is around 20 kilometers away from the Polish border.
It is certainly a potential target that Russia might try to hit. Let's remind ourselves that no target in Ukraine is a legitimate target. Russia should not be attacking Ukraine at all. They should be pulling their forces out and letting Ukraine live as a sovereign and independent state. But given that Russia has decided to wage war against Ukraine, anything in Ukrainian territory, the Russians would see as a legitimate target. And if they are clear that they're not trying to target NATO, that's one thing. If they actually intentionally targeted NATO, that's an entirely different thing.
And when we see, I was talking with our previous guest about watching Sergei Lavrov at the G20 summit in Bali. When we see Russia being represented on a world stage, what does this tell us about how the international community is viewing Russia and viewing what Russia has been doing, given that today, of all days, we saw that huge number of rockets, missiles being launched within Ukraine itself?
Yeah, well, it's several things at once. I mean, first off, it's not Vladimir Putin who is there. And I think that's because Putin knew that he would get an earful from all kinds of world leaders about his conduct of this war against Ukraine and also his threats to use nuclear weapons. So he didn't want to hear it. That's already a signal from the rest of the world. In addition to that, I think Russia conducting these attacks while this meeting is ongoing, meaning that everyone there is going to be discussing it, is also an indicator that he is choosing to isolate himself more and more from the rest of the international community. And we've seen signs over the last several weeks that countries in the global south, whether it's China or India or elsewhere, are increasingly beginning to distance themselves from Russia. In the early phases of the war, they were talking about, staying out of it, not knowing if they're going to have to deal with Putin again in the future, viewing this as a European issue. But increasingly, I think countries in the global south are starting to signal their displeasure with what Russia is doing.
Okay, well, Kurt Volker, it's really good of you to speak to us, give us your reaction to this developing story that we are yet to have fully confirmed. But for the time being, Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO, thank you very much. So I think this is the moment just to remind everybody about what we know so far. The Pentagon is saying that it cannot confirm reports that Russian missiles have crossed into Poland near the Ukraine border. Now, firefighters in Poland reported that 2 people died in an explosion in Przewodów. It's a village in eastern Poland, very near to the Ukraine border. The Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has called an urgent meeting of the country's National Security Council. A senior source in the Polish Prime Minister's office told the BBC it is informational chaos, adding that I have no certainty and I cannot confirm anything. Now, this follows a series of strikes in Ukraine today. Officials have said that Russia had mounted its biggest strike against the country's energy system since the invasion in February. So cannot confirm that this is a Russian missile, but we're reporting, many, especially the Polish media, reporting that Russian missiles have dropped in Poland, very close to the border with Ukraine. Let's talk to Shashank Joshi, defense editor at The Economist. And Shashank, I know you understand I'm caveating this all the time until we get any kind of confirmation, but we do know that Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has convened that special meeting, and that this potentially is an extremely serious, not least a serious situation, not least given what else we've been seeing throughout the day in Ukraine.
Yes, it's worth noting that, as you said, Department of Defense, the Pentagon, hasn't confirmed these reports, but I think it is noteworthy, nevertheless, that Latvia's Deputy Prime Minister and also its Defense Minister, and Latvia is, of course, a member of NATO and a close partner of Poland in the Baltic region, has described this as an attack by Russia on NATO soil. we can't independently corroborate those reports, and it requires, I think, some Polish statement analysing the wreckage, telling us about the potential trajectory of those missiles. And from my perspective, as a journalist reporting on this and watching this, I would emphasise it's important to keep an open mind, because although a Russian missile strike, a stray missile, is, I would say, the most likely possibility, given the scant evidence we have, there are other possibilities. For example, that a Ukrainian air defense system fired an interceptor missile and either landed in Poland or broke up the Russian missile, parts of which then landed in Poland. The images show a fairly sizable crater, so that gives you some indication of the kind of munition that may have caused this. But it is important to keep an open mind at this stage, given the gravity of this situation and the potential consequences of something like this.
Well, as you say, the Estonian Foreign Ministry is saying news from Poland is most concerning, and Estonia, of course, a NATO member, ready to defend every inch of NATO territory. But again, as you stress, and I'm caveating this all the time, we are yet to have that confirmation as to this missile, possible missile attack. Also, Hungary's Viktor Orban convening the Defence Council over reports of this potential Russian missile. I guess we saw NATO earlier on today, and this is on it, a Polish media outlet, which is talking about an explosion in Przewodów, the village in eastern Poland, Wojewoda Lubelska. This is the region, the Lublin region. Dojechał na miejsce ekspozycja. So again, we're still waiting for that absolute confirmation as to what caused that explosion, but that looks like some kind of farm vehicle on its side. Shashank, we understand, we saw earlier on this year NATO having that strategic summit, talking about increasing its border with Russia, doubling its border with Russia. For those countries along the border, this is really worrying, needless to say.
It is. And of course, when those countries in the East joined NATO in the late 1990s and 2000s, beginning in, I think, 1997 was the first round of expansion, Russia and NATO signed something called the Founding Act. And the Founding Act was a sort of document that said, here is a relationship we're going to build. The Cold War's finished. And they agreed to have restraint on their border. And NATO said it would not deploy permanent, substantial combat forces in Eastern Europe along the new border with Russia. But of course, everything changed in 2014 with the Russian invasion of Crimea. And more Eastern European governments believe the Founding Act is dead. They want to see NATO, their allies, deploy forces permanently in their countries. Of course, we have something called enhanced forward presence, which are these multinational battle groups in the Baltic states, in Poland, and now in Romania, Slovakia, I think possibly Hungary, led by a host of countries. But even so, people are very cautious about putting too much hardware permanently or offensive weapons in Eastern Europe. But incidents like this, the war itself, and incidents like this, moments of tension like this, I think heighten the call, the demand by Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. Those countries that have lived under Russian occupation are very skeptical of Russia, very hawkish towards Russia. They will say, look, we told you we need more protection from our allies. And I think this will result in a heightened conversation about more Western missile defense in Eastern Europe.
But we saw again during NATO, the big summit that took place in Madrid, that for the first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we've had US Army permanently based in Poland. And that was really welcomed by Poland because they have continuously been voicing their concerns as to what Russia was potentially doing, especially in that Donbass region with Crimea as well. And I guess this will just, for the Polish government, no doubt, will show that they were right to be so concerned.
Yes, but of course it is important to remember here as well, this isn't the first such incident we've had. If you cast your mind back to March, or the spring at least, there were a number of incidents. There was one in which I think the Russians struck a training base about 15 miles from the Poland-Ukraine border, and that was seen as a moment of substantial tension. We also saw an incident, I think perhaps roughly the same month, in which a Soviet-era drone carrying traces of explosives crash-landed or crashed in Zagreb in Croatia, and to do that it would have had to overfly a number of NATO member states. And then, of course, more recently, last month, we saw a Russian fighter jet fire a missile accidentally in the vicinity of a British electronic surveillance, a spy plane flying over the Black Sea. And the worry has always been, when you have huge numbers of military forces, Russian forces operating in Ukraine close to NATO borders, when you have repeated Russian missile strikes close to NATO borders, the scope for some sort of accident has always been there. And as Russia's policy with missile strikes and drone strikes has become more aggressive, particularly in the last month or so, with attacks on the electrical infrastructure, including perhaps some of the electrical supply lines west into Europe, I think the risk of this sort of incident has grown over time. And I wouldn't be entirely surprised if this was a consequence of Russia's more aggressive risk-taking with that approach in the last month.
We've just got reaction. Shashank, I'll take the opportunity to get your reaction to this, but the Lithuanian president is, as well, Lithuania also a NATO member, saying that his country stands in strong solidarity with Poland. Every inch of NATO territory must be defended. But if this is a missile that just has overshot its target, and if it was Yavoriv, as potentially you were alluding, you were describing there, that base that had been targeted at the beginning of the war, very close, around 20 kilometers away from the Poland-Ukraine border, then does that change NATO's stance when it comes to an attack on one is an attack on all?
Well, I think we have to be very careful here. People tend to know about Article 5, and Article 5 is NATO's mutual defence clause that says an attack on one is an attack on all, and any armed attack on NATO soil in a certain designated territory in Europe constitutes an attack. But I think, first of all, we don't even know whether this was an armed attack, and as we've said, there are other possibilities we have to entertain. But I think even if it was a stray missile, a Russian missile that landed in Poland, that was aimed inside Ukraine, but landed on the wrong site, I think what is far more likely than Article 5, which is a very significant and substantial step for the alliance to take. It's only taken it once in its history, and that was after 9/11, when allies invoked it in support of the United States. Far more likely than that is something called Article 4, which is much less well known, but it effectively means consultations. It means the allies consult over security. We've had Article 4, for example. I think Turkey invoked Article 4 at a time when Syria was escalating on its border with Turkey. And it means allies can gather, they can convene, they can discuss the situation, they can offer mutual aid, such as intelligence, other kinds of assistance, but it doesn't commit them to the sort of same sort of steps you would expect if there was an armed attack on them. So I think in the coming days, even if this was an accident, even if this was debris, if it was in some way connected to Russian missile activity, I think an invocation of Article 4 is the likeliest course of action you're going to see. And of course, it's going to be easier to have some of these conversations because you have the G20 summit, you have leaders already convened in Bali, you have a lot of activity going on around in Europe with the Ramstein summit, where those countries supporting Ukraine with arms are preparing to gather and talk. And so I think that's the likeliest next step in terms of responding to these events.
Well, it just leads, and again, it's really important to caveat what we are potentially discussing, and the Czech Prime Minister kind of sums it up. If Poland confirms that missiles also hit its territory, and I'm just stressing that if, because we are hearing a lot from Polish media on it, they're showing a vehicle, potentially this farm, where an explosion took place. The Czech Prime Minister saying if Poland confirms that missiles also hit its territory, this will be a further escalation by Russia. And I just want to pick up Russia's defense ministry statements So Russia's, and this is again just coming in to us at the BBC now, Shashank, so I'm just reading this for the first time. Russia's defense ministry is saying that statements by Polish media and officials about the Russian missile hitting Polish territory are a deliberate provocation with the aim of escalating the situation. So this is Russia's defense ministry that's being quoted by the Reuters news agency, saying that these statements are a deliberate provocation with the aim of escalating the situation, Shashank. And I guess that's something that, well, arguably, it's something that that kind of reaction that they would give in order to, I want to say calm the situation, but given what we've been seeing across Ukraine today, that's a difficult way of putting it.
Well, I would emphasize that when you interpret Russian government statements, you have to look at them in the context of the historical record on this. When Russia tried to assassinate and poison Sergei Skripal, a former Russian intelligence officer in Britain, they insisted it was a provocation by the British. When Russian separatists shot down MH17 over Ukraine, they insisted it was a provocation by Ukrainians or European countries. When we saw the Bucha massacre in of course, the war crimes that occurred around north of Kiev earlier in this conflict, the Russian government said it was a provocation by the British intelligence services. So whilst, of course, as a news organization, you're obliged to report Russian statements and we have to consider them and listen to them, the polite way to put this is that Russia's government has a record of issuing outlandish and quite fantastical statements to displace responsibility for actions in this conflict. So while we don't know precisely what's happened, I am fairly confident putting fairly low stock in the credibility of Russian statements. And it is notable, I would say, that the editor-in-chief of RT, formerly Russia Today, the Russian state propaganda mouthpiece, has been gloating, comparing this to Ukrainian attacks on Belgorod in Russia, and comparing it to a sort of deliberate attack. So I think it's interesting that the Russian state media is trying to portray this as a deliberate attack, whether or not it is, which shows you the effect that they're trying to achieve.
Shashank, thank you very much just for reacting to this developing story. And yes, we're getting a lot of lines coming from Russia's defense ministry saying that there were no strikes against targets near the Ukraine-Poland border. But I think we heard from Shashank Joshi there his reaction as to the credibility of the reaction from Russian media and from the Russian Defense Ministry. We are, of course, continuing to monitor everything that is happening and these reports that we're getting through that we are yet to have confirmed. But we're going to get some reaction from Poland's neighbours. Already mentioned Lithuanian's leader, well, its president has called it concerning news, saying that every inch of NATO territory must be defended. And this is the Latvian Deputy Prime Minister who said that the country fully stands with Polish friends and condemns this crime. The Hungarian Secretary of State for Communications said that Hungary's Prime Minister has convened the country's Defence Council. And the Czech Prime Minister said that if Poland, and again I stress that if Poland confirms that missiles also hit its territory, this will be a further escalation by Russia. So let's get more from Poland's response to these reports. Bartosz Kielak is my colleague who joins us live now. Bartosz.
Hello, hi Kasia, and thank you very much for having me. There's very little that we know so far. The initial reports in the Polish media came from very reputable sources, but apart from images that seem to confirm damage that was caused to what looks like a grain storage, like a grain waiting facility, and apart from the fact that we know 2 people have died, very little else is known. I've spoken in the last half an hour to a very senior official with the Prime Minister of Poland, and that person said that what they're receiving now is a chaos of information. There's very little certainty that they have, and as we said earlier in the program, there's an ongoing meeting of the Bureau of National Security by the Prime Minister. Later tonight, whole government will meet and will debate what the appropriate response will be, both to today's bombardments of Ukrainian targets, which included Lviv, remarkably close to the Polish border, but also the two casualties and the attack near the Polish border with Ukraine. We know that 2 people have died. We know that the explosion seems to have damaged some sort of agricultural equipment. The location is miles away from the Polish border with Ukraine, but it's also very far from the nearest urban centers in Poland. So it will be hours before first reporters get there, and we will start getting that information firsthand. Best we can hope for now is that the Polish government will finish the National Bureau of Security meeting and we'll get information from them.
Okay, Bartosz, thank you very much just for bringing us some of the reaction from Poland itself. And yes, we do know, as Bartosz was saying there, the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has convened this Defence Council over these reports. And also we're getting information that in just the past few minutes, President Zelensky has been addressing this. I'd just like to, before we talk about what President Zelensky said, I'd like to welcome our viewers on PBS for joining us here on BBC News during this breaking news that we are getting reports of, and these are unconfirmed reports, of Russian missiles falling within Poland. Poland has convened an emergency national security meeting after 2 people were killed near the border with Ukraine. And it follows these reports that stray Russian missiles fell on a farm near the Ukrainian border, killing 2 people, with firefighters confirming an explosion at a farm and 2 deaths. But we are still waiting for confirmation as to the cause of the explosions, whether they were indeed Russian missiles. But we do know that there's been a lot of activity, Russian attacks launched throughout the day across Ukraine. Now, a short time ago, Russia issued a response. They said that no strikes against targets near the Ukrainian-Polish border have been carried out by Russian weapons. So the Russian Defense Ministry, they're refuting any of these allegations, and these are yet to be confirmed. Now, in just the past few minutes, President Zelensky has said that new Russian strikes are a slap in the face of the G20. Of course, the G20 that's convening in Bali. President Putin not attending the G20, but Sergei Lavrov is there representing Russia. Now, the reported incident in Poland comes after, as I mentioned, Russia launched one of its biggest barrages of missiles yet on Ukraine. Many infrastructure and energy infrastructure and buildings were targeted. At least 1 person is known to have died in Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky said that more than 80 missiles were launched against the country, and there are fears that that could go up. Let's cross over live to Kiev to speak to Volodymyr Runets, who's an anchor for ICTV. ICTV, one of Ukraine's biggest television channels, joining us, Volodymyr, from Kiev. Before we talk about what happened in Kiev and across Ukraine, I just want to get your reaction in terms of what we're hearing, yet to be confirmed, but the possibility that Russian missiles have fallen within Poland.
Well, of course, what you are saying is important for everyone here in Ukraine, and everyone is following the news without, without exaggeration. People are following what's going to happen next, whether paragraph 5 of the NATO statute is going to be applied here, and what NATO's response will be to that alleged attack on the Polish territory, killing at least 2 people within a NATO state. Of course, people of Ukraine are expecting a response, and everyone is discussing on social media and elsewhere what this response is going to be like, what's going to happen, what will Poland and all other NATO nations will say and do to respond to that attack, and also what they will do to prevent further attacks on NATO countries and on Ukraine as well.
Now, absolutely critical just to stress once again that these are unconfirmed reports that stray Russian missiles have fallen. We're just going, but before we carry on, this is the White House press conference.
Speculate about any hypotheticals just yet. Shannon.
Asking a more broad strokes question then generally, will the U.S. look into the intent? How important is that in determining response if a strike is accidental versus if something is deemed to be intentional when consulting with NATO allies?
Of course, that is something that would be of importance. And as I said, we will determine what happened and we will determine appropriate next steps. But like I said, this just happened within the past hour. And so we are still taking the important time to figure out the exact facts.
Just logistics, on logistics, when it comes to triggering Article 5 of NATO, I know you don't want to, get too far ahead of where things stand now, but because this department knows really well how that process would work, could you just lay out a little bit of how you guys would go about that process and what it would look like for folks as we're in this moment of trying to figure out what's next?
I certainly appreciate that question, but I do want to be very careful of not getting ahead of hypotheticals. I'm happy to see if we have a specific sort of sequencing to share with you, but again, I want to be very, very careful about not getting ahead of hypotheticals here as we continue to take time to determine what happened. Alex?
Has the department reached out to Polish officials? Do you have any communications?
Like I said, I don't have any, like I said to Matt, I don't have any calls to read out at this point, but of course, Poland is an important ally and partner, and like I said, we are working with them to determine what happened and assess next steps as well.
In a broader context, what is your confidence level that Putin is not targeting NATO, given his latest statements?
I'm just not going to try and speculate or try and get in the mind of President Putin or his intentions. What we do know is that this war has been one that is unjust. It's been brutal. It has affected millions of lives, not just in Ukraine, but across the world as well. As you guys saw in response to President Zelensky's speech at the G20, what President Putin did was he met Ukraine with another round of cruel attacks that killed civilians and destroyed infrastructure. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to stand with the government and the people of Ukraine who have stayed strong in the face of Russia's brutal and needless onslaught for months, and we will continue to support Ukraine. Camilla.
When you say you're working with the Polish government and allies and partners, can you confirm that this department's speaking to Ukrainian officials and trying to get more insight from them as to what this might have been and whether or not they have responded at all?
Camilla, we're talking to a range of partners, but like I said, this just transpired, so I don't have specific calls or line item actions to read out for you. But again, I want to assure that we will get to the bottom of what has happened. We'll determine what's happened and determine appropriate next steps. Leon.
Yeah, before Article 5, there's Article 4, which is on emergency consultations with the United States. Are you ready to call for emergency consultations on this issue?
Look, Leon, we of course are ready to stand with our NATO allies and partners, but I want to again be very clear that we do not want to get ahead of hypotheticals. We do not know what has happened yet. We have seen reports out of Poland. They of course are incredibly concerning, and we're working with our partners in the Polish government and our NATO partners to get more information and to assess what has happened. We will make that determination and we will determine appropriate next steps as well.
Just to follow up, certain media are quoting U.S. intelligence officials on their story. So I'm assuming that
Leon, what I can say from this podium in front of you all on camera and on the record is that we've seen these reports and that we are working with the Polish government and other partners to assess and get more information. We cannot confirm the reports of what has happened or the details, but we are working through that process to determine what happened and determine appropriate next steps. In the back.
Marcin Wrona, TV and Warner Bros. Discovery from Poland. So you repeated a few times that you are working with the Polish government on this issue. Who are you talking with? At what level, if you don't want to give any specific names? And also, if this is confirmed, should this trigger an immediate increase of the numbers of U.S. Boots on the ground in Poland, maybe sending additional Patriot batteries, fortifying eastern flank?
I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but again, I do not want to get ahead of hypotheticals or get into a tit for tat of potential actions. What I can say is that we will determine what happened and we will determine what appropriate next steps to take. We are engaging directly with our partners in the Polish government. I don't have specifics to offer in terms of who and at what level. But like I said, Poland is an important partner, an important NATO ally, and so we are continuing to work through these process and engage on that.
A follow-up: will Secretary Blinken want to talk to Minister Rao? Is a contact at this level possible?
I don't have any calls to preview or read out yet, for that matter. So I'm just not going to get ahead of that process in the back.
So not getting into hypotheticals, but President Biden did say. And Secretary Blinken also have repeatedly said that, U.S. gonna defend every inch of NATO territory. So can you just repeat it today, as in principle? And do you have any reaction to just the overall attack, the barrage from Russia today? It's been reported that it's the largest one so far, largest missile attack. Do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, I think I spoke to this a little bit in responding to Alex's question. But first, to your first question, of course, we stand by NATO and our NATO allies and partners. This administration views NATO as one of the most important transatlantic defensive alliances out there. But again, I'm not going to get ahead of hypotheticals as we continue to work through this process and determine what's happened and determine appropriate next steps. On the barrage of strikes that we saw take place in Kyiv, as I said, while President Zelensky spoke at the G20 about a path to a just peace and for ending this war, what we saw was Russia unleash a barrage of attacks that have killed civilians and destroyed critical infrastructure. And it is no surprise that after the Ukrainian liberation of Kherson, that Russia has gone down the path of attempting yet again to plunge Ukrainian civilians into darkness. But what the United States is going to do is going to continue to stand by the government and the people of Ukraine, and our commitment to our Ukrainian partners is unwavering. Anything else?
One last question on this. I know you don't want to get ahead of this, but Russia's already trying to spin the situation here with the defense minister putting out a short statement saying that the reports of Russian missiles landing in Poland are, quote, a deliberate provocation aimed to escalate the situation. Do you have a response to what they're saying about this?
Well, the United States is certainly not trying to escalate or incite the situation at all. And like I said, we have seen these same reports that you all have, and we are working with the Polish government to gather more information. And we are not at a point where we can confirm some of these reports that we are seeing. And that's why I'm telling you that we will determine what exactly has transpired, and we will determine appropriate next steps as well. Let's go from there. Still on the region, or are we moving away?
On this topic, please.
Let me do one more, and then I'll come back to you. And then we're going to work through them, Alex.
In response to Putin's terrorist attacks, you just mentioned over 100 missiles have been, stuck in Kiev and around. Is it time for the department to revisit its decision on Russia's sensitive information? And if not now, then when?
Alex, we have spoken about this quite regularly, and our answer continues to be the same, and that is that we have a number of tools in our tool belt to hold the Russian Federation accountable and to support our Ukrainian partners. We have done that through sanctions and export controls on Russia. We have done that through security assistance and humanitarian assistance to our Ukrainian partners. And we continue to assess that that a specific state sponsor of terror designation would largely be a redundancy to the many lines of efforts that the United States has already undertaken. Additionally, as I said to you about this a couple of weeks ago, it's been raised to us that a number of humanitarian organizations operating in the region.
So that press conference by the White House saying it's working with the Polish government to gather more information from the State Department. Apologies. The State Department also, we know, saying that they are says the United States is certainly not trying to escalate when asked about Russian Defense Ministry statement on Poland reports. That being what the Russian Defense Ministry was saying in terms of this is a provocation and an attempt to escalate the situation. So the State Department there saying that the White House is working with the Polish government. We know that the Polish government has currently convened a special council meeting to work out what is happening. Let's cross over to speak to Paul Adams, our diplomatic correspondent who joins us from the newsroom. So, Paul, just talk us through the kind of what is happening now behind the scenes as we try and work out what has happened on the ground.
Well, look, I think what's happening is that everyone is trying to figure out exactly what happened on the ground. This is an incident that has taken place on the border of a country at war with Russia, and the effects of that incident have been felt on the territory of a NATO member. So that, on the face of it, is a grave situation, and it is the kind of situation, frankly, that people have been apprehensive about ever since the war began. The possibility that it might at some stage spill over and involve NATO countries. Now, in terms of figuring out what happened, let's not forget that this happened on a day in which a lot of missiles were flying around in Ukrainian airspace. Russian missiles that were targeting cities and infrastructure from one end of the country to the other, and a great many Ukrainian air defense missiles trying to shoot those down, and in many cases succeeding in shooting those down. So there are a lot of possibilities about what happened that resulted in the deaths of 2 farm workers right there on the border, just across the border in Poland. One, that a Russian missile somehow flew off course and landed where it was not intended to land. I don't think anyone suspects or thinks that Russia has an interest in attacking Polish farms. Or 2, that a missile was indeed hit by Ukrainian air defenses, knocked off course and landed across the border in Poland. Those are all possibilities, and they will take time to figure out. I think Kurt Volker, the former US ambassador to NATO, put it very well. He said Russia needs to have an opportunity to explain what happens, that NATO should demand that Russia explain what happened, and only after that should NATO decide on what further action it should take. I don't think we should be particularly surprised that the initial response from Moscow is a rather defensive one. The Russian Defense Ministry denying reports that one of its missiles was involved and calling this a deliberate provocation, though without saying who was trying to provoke who. This is very early days still, and I think it will take some time, given the fact that this involves a number of countries, before we know exactly what went on. But I think we should not jump to any conclusions that Russia deliberately decided to launch an attack on a NATO member. Just think about why on earth that would be a sensible thing for Russia to do right now.
It's really good to get that perspective from you, in the sense that this has only been breaking for the past hour and 20 minutes or so. So it's very raw news in terms of what we do know. And like you say, these are reports that Russian missiles may have crossed into Poland. And we are hearing how the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying that the suggestion that they are Russian missiles is an escalation, is a provocation. But we are also hearing that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is saying that Russian missiles have struck Poland. And he also says, we have long warned that Russian actions are not limited to Ukraine, adding that they will always support Poland. We know that Volodymyr Zelensky has a close relationship with Andrzej Duda, but just in terms of the rhetoric, world leaders will be trying to de-escalate whatever this ends up to be. I just wonder, in terms of the machinations of that, how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there will be very concerted efforts to de-escalate, because just as Russia doesn't really have an interest in taking on NATO right now, nor, frankly, does NATO have an interest in taking on Russia. So no one is going to want to arrive at the conclusion that Russia has deliberately attacked a NATO member and that therefore NATO is compelled to respond. You know, the comment you just mentioned from President Zelensky, not surprising. He has indeed warned of the dangers of this spilling over. I think some of the comments from the Baltics, the Latvian defense minister in particular, was a little incendiary, although if you look carefully at what he said, he did not actually accuse Russia of deliberately targeting Poland. The Polish government, it has to be said, seems to have responded pretty cautiously. You know, there is this emergency meeting going on. No Polish official, to my knowledge, has said anything of any consequence so far. You know, this is not a government in Warsaw that is in any sense a fan of Russia, and so, you know, to point the finger at Russia might be an easy instinct. Well, it hasn't done that so far, and I think everybody is acutely conscious of the need not to jump to any immediate conclusions, because those conclusions could be extremely dangerous.
Paul Adams, our diplomatic correspondent, thank you very much. And just on that vein, in that note, we've had an initial reaction from NATO, who were asked about these developments, or at least these unconfirmed reports from Poland. A NATO official has told the BBC that NATO is looking into these reports and closely coordinating with our ally Poland. So that reaction from NATO, that the alliance, this transatlantic alliance, is looking into these reports. And as I was just discussing with Paul Adams, we've only just heard about this for the past hour and 20 minutes or so, that unconfirmed reports that Russian missiles have fallen in Poland. NATO looking at these reports, closely coordinating with our ally Poland. And we also heard that the White House is also working with the Polish government to gather more information about these allegations. So I think it's just worth just to take a pause and to remind ourselves of the breaking news and what we do know so far. And we do know that Poland has convened an emergency national security meeting. It's after 2 people were killed near the border with Ukraine. No reason has been given. That's the village of Przewodów. But it follows reports that stray Russian missiles fell on a Polish farm near the Ukrainian border, killing 2 people. Unconfirmed reports. Now, firefighters have confirmed an explosion at the farm and that 2 deaths did happen, but we haven't got a confirmed reason as to why that explosion happened. So far, we've had this response from Russia. No strikes against targets near the Ukrainian-Polish border have been carried out by Russian weapons. It says that statements by Polish media and officials were an intentional provocation for the purpose of escalation. Well, we can talk now to a Polish journalist, Marcin Telik, who joins us from Olsztyn in Poland. And Marcin, I wonder, can you just start by telling us what you know? Because I know every Polish outlet right now, all the media organisations are reporting on this, but has it been confirmed that this explosion near the border was indeed a Russian missile? I wonder if, Marcin, you can just tell us what it is that you know about what has happened there.
Yeah, hello, good evening. Yeah, so we're, as you said, we're still waiting for any official information from Polish government. In the late afternoon, there were first reports of an explosion explosion of a tractor in a farmhouse in a building where the grain is dried, very near a Russian border. The first reports were about just the explosion of a tractor, but just shortly after, there came first reports that these were Russian missiles, and 2 people were killed. Yeah, actually, like several Polish media were able to confirm it unofficially, my portal as well. in the government administration sources that it is that these were the Russian rockets, but we still don't know much more, and we're waiting for official information from the government. We know that there is this session of the Council of Ministers. There was a session of Special Committee of National Security. So far, around 7 p.m., the only official communicate of the government was the spokesperson of the government who said that these committees are convening, and we ask you to not give much more information. Wait for the official communicates.
Now, I know that when I was on the border at the beginning of the war, there was a lot of concern of something like, and again, I'm always reiterating that this is unconfirmed as such, but there were concerns that a potential missile could overreach. I wonder, just in terms of reaction from, briefly, if you would, Marcin, from the Polish public, what have you been hearing so far?
Yeah, there is this sense, for sure. There is this sense of waiting for. I wouldn't say there is a panic. Like, yeah, everybody got alerted. People are exchanging messages about it, but there's no panic so far. We cannot say that. And yeah, as you said, this possibility, this scenario that the Russian rocket will stray and can land in Polish territory was already.
Marcin, I just want to take this moment to say goodbye to our viewers on PBS. Of course, there is much more on this developing story on the BBC News website. Marcin, apologies for interrupting you there. I've just stopped your train of thought, but you were saying, please do continue.
Yeah, so this scenario was considered, like in media. I'm pretty sure it was considered by the government officials as well from the very beginning of the war, as from the very first morning, very first night of the war. The Russian rockets were already hitting targets near Polish border in western Ukraine, near Lviv and other cities in western Ukraine. We had rockets landing very closely to the border so far. So yeah, it was considered that something like this can happen. So yeah, there is. If you ask about the reaction of public, it's all very fresh. And I think yeah, like everybody's waiting for any word from the government also to see what will be the reaction.
Okay, well, Marcin Trelik, a Polish journalist, joining us live now. Thank you very much for just bringing us up to date in terms of what you know as to what is happening on the ground. And as Marcin was saying there, we're waiting for official confirmation from the Polish government as to what it is that they're meeting at the moment, what it is that they know in terms of these reports that a Russian missile has landed within Polish territory. So let's get reaction from Poland's neighbours, because there's been a lot of reaction from countries like Lithuania, where the president called this as concerning news, saying that every inch of NATO territory must be defended. And this reaction from the Latvian Deputy Prime Minister, who said that the country fully stands with Polish friends and condemns this crime. The Hungarian Secretary of State for Communications said that Hungary's Prime Minister has convened the country's Defence Council. And the Czech Prime Minister said that if Poland confirms that missiles also hit its territory, this will be a further escalation by Russia. The Slovakian Defence Minister saying that he was very concerned by the reports and said that Russia must explain what happened and that Russia's recklessness is getting out of hand. Well, in the past few minutes, we've been hearing from a NATO official who's told the BBC that we are looking at these reports and closely coordinating with our ally Poland. So we can talk now to the former permanent representative of Turkey to NATO, Ahmet Uzemciu. It's good of you to join us. Just let's start initially with what it is that you know in terms of these reports about possible Russian missiles striking Poland?
Actually, it's, I believe that it's very early to draw a conclusion, as it was said earlier. And we don't know yet whether it's a Russian missile or not. And a thorough investigation must be conducted, I believe. And it's very sad that 2 people have already have lost their lives out of this incident.
How, when it comes to the working process of what NATO is doing now, we know that NATO is working with the Polish government. They've issued a statement that they're looking into what is happening, but just give us an insight into what happens behind the scenes when something like this happens, in terms of trying to establish what is going on the ground.
I'm sure NATO is looking to Poland first to provide detailed information about the incident and the investigation, which is probably being conducted by the Polish authorities. And the report will be forwarded to NATO, shared with the allies and the NATO Secretary General, of course. And I'm sure that tomorrow the NATO Council will meet, with the participation of permanent representatives of allied countries and discuss the issue. This is a very grave situation. In fact, it's the first time that it's happening, that such a strike happened against a NATO ally during the war in Ukraine. And it's following, a series of missile strikes by Russia against Ukraine. 85 missiles apparently have been launched against Ukraine over the past, day or so. So that's, a real escalation, and everyone should act cautiously, I believe, all parties, including the NATO allies. I'm sure they will do so. And Poland will be the main actor, in fact, to provide information and to submit if there are any requests for reinforcement of NATO forces, which are already present in its territory. It may also choose to invoke Article 4, which, of the Washington Treaty, which is, asking the allies to undertake consultations about the threats against a NATO country. Short of Article 5, of course, but I think it will be up to Poland, in fact, to submit the case and share information with allies.
And when it comes to, of course, it's again good of you just to say this is early days, and I keep stressing that we've only just getting this information within the past hour and a half, so it is very, very early at the moment to appreciate what is happening, and we are yet waiting for confirmation as to what caused the explosion. But just in terms of what you would expect or what you would want to hear from Russia, we know Sergei Lavrov is at the G20. He has the ear of the international community. What kind of responses would you expect? And is NATO in communication with the Kremlin in order to work out what is happening?
I'm not sure that NATO is direct communication with Russia, but there have been talks, as you know, between senior officials from the United States and Russia in Ankara just yesterday or the day before. And there are, Mr. Lavrov is, in Indonesia, in Bali, for the G20 meeting. So the Russian authorities have to give an explanation, of course, on this incident. And I hope that it will, reflect the truth. I don't think Russia has any interest on, attacking a NATO country. That's for sure. But if it was an accident, then they should explain it.
I just wonder, because we have Sergei Lavrov at the G20, and we also have this huge amount of strikes by Russia against Ukraine. What does that say about Russia's attitude towards what the international community thinks? What kind of leverage the international community has in terms of trying to reach out to Russia?
I think, the withdrawal from Kherson was quite a humiliating, had a humiliating effect on the Russian leadership. And probably it is a response to this forced withdrawal from an occupied, territory of Ukraine. And so it's aimed at punishing, in fact, Ukraine for forcing them to withdraw from Kherson, which was a strategically important, city and region. In fact, Ukraine is waging, a war of independence against an invading country, and the West has been providing support, but has been also been very cautious, in suggesting restraint to the Ukrainian leadership not to attack the Russian territories. So in return, actually, the West would expect also the Russians to show a similar restraint not to attack any territory of a NATO country.
Okay, we're going to leave it there, but I appreciate your reaction and response. That was Ahmed Uzumcu, former permanent representative of Turkey to NATO, and NATO there saying it's been reacting to a question by the BBC saying that they are looking into these allegations and working with Poland, as also we heard the State Department speaking on the developments in Poland a little earlier. Here's what they had to say.
What we do know is that this war has been one that is unjust. It's been brutal. It has affected millions of lives, not just in Ukraine, but across the world as well. And as you guys saw in response to President Zelensky's speech at the G20, what President Putin did was he met Ukraine with another round of cruel attacks that killed civilians and destroyed infrastructure. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to stand with the government and the people of Ukraine who have stayed strong in the face of Russia's brutal and needless onslaught for months, and we will continue to support Ukraine.
So the US State Department, they're giving its reaction, saying that it's the White House is working with Poland to establish what has happened. Those reports that Russian missiles have fallen within Polish territory. Let's cross over live to Warsaw because I want to show you the outside of the Polish Office of National Security. This is where we are expecting to hear a statement from the government, a government spokesperson. Now, we know that the Polish Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, has called an urgent meeting of the country's National Security Council, and they are, of course, trying to establish what has happened in that village in the east of Poland, very close to Poland's border with Ukraine, where we're getting those reports that a Russian missile has fallen. But like I say, and I keep stressing this, these are reports for the time being. We are waiting any confirmation, and we hope to hear from a spokesperson for the Polish government, Mateusz Morawiecki, calling that urgent meeting. So that's the scene live. The podium, we've got all the reporters, of course, they're waiting, and we know that the Polish media very much reporting what is happening. Let's talk to our State Department correspondent, Barbara Pletasher, who is monitoring the US State Department's press conference, that statement that the US State Department gave. Very much at the moment, Barbara, just trying to establish what is potentially happening and just reiterating that they are working with the Polish government.
Yes, that's right. You know, one of the reports that talked about this alleged missile attack quoted an unnamed U.S. intelligence official, but the U.S. government is being very cautious. The State Department and the White House and the Pentagon have all said they cannot confirm these reports. They're speaking to members of the Polish government. They're trying to find out what has happened, and then they will think about what steps need to be taken, if steps need to be taken at all. And they have also reaffirmed that the United States has a very strong commitment to its Article 5 responsibilities under NATO, which is to protect any NATO allies. As you may recall, President Biden has been quite clear about that on numerous occasions. He has said that the Americans would be ready to defend every inch of NATO territory, and he's called it a sacred obligation. Having said that, the State Department also said in determining next steps, if indeed this does turn out to have been missiles from Russia, that intention would be one of the things taken into account or factored in terms of any response. By that meaning, would it have been a deliberate strike? Would it have been an accident? Would it have been a missile gone astray? So those would all be parts of what the deliberation would be once it is confirmed either way about what caused those explosions just over the border from Ukraine and Poland.
I guess all of this caution, but the backdrop is, of course, that we've had extensive action within Ukraine itself today.
Yes, the U.S. government has responded in terms of the Russian missile strikes on Kyiv and other parts of the country that were targeting the electricity grid. They have been quite strong in condemning that. The White House did so, saying that, and tying it actually to the meeting of the G20 in Bali, which is where President Biden is saying that this would only serve to deepen the concerns among the G20 about the destabilizing impact of Putin's war, because they are trying to work on a statement there that would call for an end to the war, and they are talking about the impact of the war on the world, the global food security, the energy markets, and so on. So the White House tied it to that scenario, but also said that it was prepared to continue to support Ukraine, to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. And also you heard the State Department spokesperson there tying that barrage of missiles to the speech by the president of Ukraine, who had apparently called for peace, and saying this was the response. So those are the ways that the U.S. government has been responding to these missile strikes, and again repeating that it would stand with Ukraine in its fight with Russia for as long as it takes.
Barbara, as always, many thanks for just bringing us up to date and bringing all those threads together. Barbara Pletasher there, our State Department correspondent. Thank you, joining us from Washington. What you're looking at is the live shot from Warsaw. This is just outside the Polish Office of National Security, and those microphones are there from the various different Polish press media organizations, because we are expecting to hear from someone from the government, a spokesperson, or whether it's a member of the government. At the moment, the Polish Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, is holding the National Security Council meeting, an emergency meeting, an urgent meeting, just to establish the details of what is happening on the ground near the border between Poland and Ukraine. This is the live shot. We are waiting to get any official confirmation as to what caused the explosion, but Polish media very much reporting on this. So let's just cross over to Kyiv, because like we were saying, all of this is happening with the backdrop of what happened today across many areas of Ukraine in terms of the attacks. Volodymyr Runets, anchor for ICTV, one of Ukraine's biggest TV channels, joining us live from Kyiv. We were speaking a bit earlier. We had to interrupt our conversation. Apologies for that. But just in terms of what you experienced, what your colleagues and friends and family experienced in Kyiv and many, many other areas across Ukraine that have been targeted. Just talk us through what Ukraine had today.
Well, to say that what we need to know is 7 million people are experiencing electricity cuts right now and have no electricity in their homes, and also have no heatings in their homes, which is what is concerning about this situation today. But I could not tell or call this situation unexpected, because everyone in Ukraine was expecting what happened today. Usually it happens on Monday. For the first time, it happened on October the 10th. And after the G20 summit, everyone here in Kiev and in other big cities and towns were expecting that this is going to happen again. So it did happen and hit a lot of civilian infrastructure, including power plants and the heating facilities that providing heating for Ukrainian for the homes of the Ukrainian people. For now we know that one person has been confirmed dead and so many injured. We don't know the exact amount yet because the Ukrainian government prefers not to mention the amount of wounded or dead before the case has been thoroughly investigated. And obviously, they're not reporting on the amount of probable military casualties. That information is classified and not to be distributed in Ukrainian society. So we don't know how bad the situation with the military facilities is, but what we do know that there are the situation is bad enough in cities like Lviv, which is right near the Polish border, and we do know that a few different targets were hit by Russian rockets earlier today. So what is happening here in Ukraine? People also follow what is happening in Poland right now, and they're saying that they hope the investigation results will come out soon, because obviously there will be some parts of the rockets, supposed rockets that hit the field, the farm in Poland, and the investigation will show who's behind this attack.
Yeah, important just to caveat that we still don't know what caused that explosion. Volodymyr Runets, anchor for ICTV, one of Ukraine's biggest television channels. Thank you very much for being on the programme with us tonight, reacting to that news of those reports from Poland and also just bringing us an update of what has happened throughout the day across Ukraine. Thank you. So let's just bring you up to date with, because it's been a busy news day for the past couple of hours, especially our breaking news. Poland has convened an emergency national security meeting. It's after 2 people were killed near the border with Ukraine. No reasons being given, but this follows reports that stray Russian missiles fell on a Polish farm near the Ukrainian border, killing 2 people. Firefighters have confirmed an explosion at the farm and the 2 deaths, but have not given a cause. So we're still awaiting more confirmation. Russia has issued a response to the allegations, saying that no strikes against targets near the Ukrainian-Polish border have been carried out by Russian weapons. It says that statements by Polish media and officials were an intentional provocation for the purpose of escalation. Well, we can speak to the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who joins us live now. Sir, just bring us, first of all, your reaction as to what it is that we are hearing in terms of these reports that possibly Russian missiles have hit within the terrains of Poland.
Well, you know, when the Russian minister issued a statement, we can change instead of Russian minister, because usually they disseminate provocations and fake information. But it is definitely Russia who launched this provocation. And I do believe that our Polish friends and partners will send a forensic and expert team on the ground. And actually, I suggest that this is the Russian missile. Let me remind you, and you just said that around 100 missiles, a barrage of 100 missiles has been launched by the Russian military the same day that G20 is having the meeting. And your prime minister, he was very vocal supporting Ukraine and actually putting the blame on Russia and actually saying that Russia is an aggressive state. But could you imagine that Putin did it on purpose? He did it deliberately. The same day as G20 is trying to find a consensus and to issue a joint statement, actually supporting Ukraine. He made not just a provocation, but another war crime, launching this barrage of missiles and violating the territory of NATO, probably. But frankly speaking, I can't figure out who could be else except Putin. So it's definitely not Ukraine who launched this missile. And the time completely fits with the time when Russia committed this war crime. So my take is that the NATO is to react, and at least NATO is urgently to invoke Article 4 of Washington Treaty. The next one is to be Article 5, but Article 4 is a consultation among all NATO member states. And Ukraine will be very supportive, as usual, in providing any kind of evidences related to this missile strike that hit the territory of NATO member state.
Mr. Yatsenyuk, I wonder just going back to the G20 summit, a lot of the experts that I've been speaking to over the past couple of hours are saying that Russia needs to react and issue a statement about, if it does turn out this to be a Russian missile that has overshot, to give a reaction. But we're already hearing Russia say that these reports are deliberate attempts at escalation, at provocation. And given what we saw today across Ukraine, especially as G20 meetings are convening, what does that say? What can we expect to hear from Russia?
Well, let me reiterate once again, this is a regular narrative. This is the Russian style and Goebbels style propaganda when they disseminate deception and fake news. So it's definitely an act of terror and war crime committed by Russia. That's my take. In terms of their deliberate actions, the day the G20 summit is right now occurring, I believe that this is not just the signal to the entire free world. They humiliated, I mean, personally, Putin deliberately humiliated both China's President Xi and Prime Minister of India, Modi, and the rest of the G20 members who were so-called neutral. I can hardly imagine how can you be neutral in this kind of aggression, of Russian aggression against the sovereign state. And he sent the signal that he doesn't care, that he's ready to move forward and that he's ready to cross any kind of red lines. And he doesn't care what kind of joint statement the G20 is to issue. So he wants to take over Ukraine and he wants to undermine the global order. And this is the signal that has actually to push both Chinese and Indians to the right side of the history, and actually to start to put the blame on Russia, to recognize that Russia is an aggressive state, and to stop any kind of financial and economic support of Russia.
Okay, well, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, we're out of time, but really appreciate your prompt reaction. Former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, thank you very much. Just reacting to that news, those reports of a Russian missile, still unconfirmed reports of those missiles potentially hitting within Polish borders. My colleague Dan Johnson is in Kraków now for us, in eastern Poland, near, quite relatively near the border, not hugely near, but quite near the border. But Dan, just what are you hearing? People obviously are going to be really worried there.
Yes, this is exactly what people in the east of Poland had feared right at the start of the war. When I was reporting here at the beginning of the conflict through the early weeks during March particularly, people in this city and closer to the Ukraine border were really worried about that conflict spilling over, either deliberately or accidentally. We saw more Poles signing up to the Territorial Defence Force. We saw them preparing for in case there were attacks that came across onto their territory. We saw people packing their cars, packing clothes, ready to flee further west. Now, the tension has eased after the early weeks of the invasion. That threat hasn't materialized, but this will cause serious concern because whatever is behind this, whatever's caused it, whatever sort of accident has occurred here, we assume that means that there has been at least, it would appear, fragments of missiles which have landed on Polish territory and taken lives. That will confirm people's worst fears that whether it was intentional or not, the conflict in Ukraine has got the potential to spill over and to cause issues here in Poland, which is NATO. This is very close to the spot where Joe Biden landed at the beginning of April in Air Force One. That was a show of support for the Polish people, for people right across Eastern Europe who were concerned at that time, a show of support for NATO, a message that NATO would be with these nations that border Ukraine should the conflict spill out of that country. Now, These reports are unconfirmed. We need to say that. We need to find out exactly what has happened, what has caused this loss of life. But it will cause major concern to people here. Life is still going on here in Krakow and the cities around this part of Poland tonight, but this is news that will concern people. It does show that the conflict has got the potential to spill over the borders and to cause damage and loss of life in Poland, a NATO country. What this means now in terms of any response is a huge question. That's why there are emergency meetings taking place involving Polish politicians, involving the politicians, the leaders of other nations in Eastern Europe tonight. Messages of support for the Polish people, for the Polish leadership, and all eyes now on NATO and on the leaders of the Western nations to see what they are going to do in terms of a response.
And Dan, as we watch just outside that government building, we're expecting a spokesperson from the Polish government to give us a little bit more detail, because that meeting, that emergency meeting, had been convened just within the past hour or so. You and I both know that people across Poland and all of those neighbouring countries have taken in so many of those refugees from Ukraine who are fleeing the country. And this will just remind everybody, not that people within those regions need reminding, but the war in Ukraine is very much active and the threat is very much there.
Of course, yes. These towns and cities in the east of Poland were absolutely on the front line of the humanitarian response to the war in Ukraine. These were the major crossing points where millions of Ukrainians poured across in the first few weeks of the war. They are still living here. There are hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian families who are living with Polish families, living in Polish families' accommodation that's been made available for all these months now in Krakow, in other towns and cities, particularly in the east of Poland. That's a way of life that to some degree they have got used to over the months that this conflict has gone on. And although things have calmed down since that intense pressure of the first few weeks of the war, everyone here has been keenly aware of the suffering of the Ukrainian people and their humanitarian needs, whether in Ukraine or as refugees here in Poland and in other countries too, but also in terms of the conflict that is happening just a few miles from here. There's always been that background unease, that potential that it could spill over, whether that be a deliberate move or not, an accidental spilling over of the conflict that could potentially involve this nation or the other nations that border Ukraine. There is intense history here that everyone is aware of. The relationship with Ukraine, with Russia, the fact that a city like Lviv, which is now in Ukraine, used to be part of Poland. There are really strong bonds here. There are cultural ties, and there is a real sympathy for the Ukrainian people and for their suffering. But as I say, the Polish people were also aware that there was the potential at some stage that they might get wrapped up in this. And that's why some people were making preparations. We know the Polish army has had its spending increased. There have been more military movements throughout this year in the east of Poland. There are more US service personnel, other NATO military forces that are based here now in readiness. There's always been a presence to some degree, but that has stepped up too this year. So everyone here has been keenly aware of just how close they are to this conflict and how it could become a real threat to their lives. It looks like, if these reports are confirmed, that has now happened to some degree.
Yeah, and we're just caveating that we need that confirmation. Dan Johnson in Krakow, thank you very much. Dan Johnson there, just reminding ourselves of the closeness of the ties between Poland and Ukraine. My father was born in Lviv, for example. Those ties are extremely close. 7 million refugees had gone into Poland. Let's talk to Bartosz Wieliński, foreign editor of Gazeta Wyborcza, Poland's national newspaper. Bartosz, what do you know? What can you tell us?
Well, I just read a report written by one of our local correspondents in Lublin, in the city close to Hrubieszów, where this explosion took place. He spoke to the witnesses, the local inhabitants. They were telling him about strange object coming from the sky and a huge blast, huge explosion that occurred in the grain processing plant close to the border. There was a tractor with a trailer on the huge scale used to weight this car, this tractor, and particularly this place was struck by this racket, or by two rackets, as we have been informed. There is no official confirmation from Polish government. There are only condolences, signs of support and solidarity coming from the Ukraine, from Germany, from Finland, from Latvia, from Czech Republic. So we get a lot of support, but we didn't know almost anything regarding to what happened. We've seen some pictures, a huge hole blown up in the ground, some pieces of metal, which could be alloy used from this racket, or well, some other thing. We have seen a picture of this destroyed tractor.
Bartosz,
we
can
know
I
that
just
two
ask,
persons were killed.
can you confirm that it was some kind of missile? Is that at least confirmed? And just briefly, if you would.
Well, officially, nobody told us it was a missile, but that's what we have learned also from Defense Department in the United States. They are talking about the missile. We simply connecting the fact that there was a huge missile strike against Ukraine today. And it could have been, well, we don't know it for sure, that some missile could be misguided, or there was some kind of tactical error. But there is no official confirmation what happened. No single detail was released by the Polish government.
Bartosz, thank you so much. We are waiting for the Polish government to give us a statement. Bartosz Wieliński from Gazeta Wyborcza. Emmanuel Macron is expecting a discussion at the G20 over this. Of course, world leaders are meeting in Bali. Much more from my colleague Christian Fraser. He is coming up next with the context.